This is a Fox 5 News special presentation. Deidra Dukes reports.
It's a reality that citizens of Metro Atlanta face daily. Crime, from heinous acts of violence that leave cities on edge to the frustrations of thefts and car break-ins. Now law enforcement and citizens alike are looking for solutions. Hello and welcome. I'm Deidra Dukes. For the next half hour, we put the focus on public safety as we discuss the groups behind the rise in violent crime and ongoing efforts to fight crime in Georgia's largest city.
Atlanta police say someone shot a delivery driver this morning.
Another weekend of gun violence.
A knock at his parents' front door ends with a teenager dead.
The deadly shots were fired around 10.
In a 10-hour span, several people shot and a couple people killed.
Crime is a great equalizer. It doesn't discriminate.
Public safety is everyone's number one concern. It doesn't matter your race, it doesn't matter your gender, your sexual orientation, it doesn't matter your socioeconomic status.
As 2021 draws to a close, the surge in violence continues nationwide.
This spike that we're seeing is not just a local incident.
From Atlanta City Hall to the state capitol to Capitol Hill, crime has emerged as a major political issue.
Our capital city is facing a crime and public safety crisis, but it is also a challenge facing many of our communities across Georgia.
In November, the Georgia General Assembly gathered under the Gold Dome for a special session, which included hearings on the spike in crime and the controversial Buckhead cityhood proposal. How did we get here?
You have these two huge events we did not have much experience with before.
Criminologist Volkan Topali is a professor of criminal justice and criminology at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State University.
We have a research lab here that studies crime and crime patterns on the street. We were in the middle of doing a study when the COVID pandemic really kind of took off. It was also around the same time that the Black Lives Matter movement sort of gained traction as well. And as part of that project, which wasn't really geared towards COVID, we just started asking the offenders that we were interviewing if they were seeing any changes on the streets in the same way that everyday people were seeing changes. You know, the stores are closed, I can't go to the restaurants I want to, I have to wear a mask everywhere. And, you know, offenders are very hip to what's going on the streets. They observe patterns of behavior, and a lot of them were saying, things are changing out there.
His team soon realized that the big changes they saw in society due to COVID and the protests wouldn't just filter down to the average citizen, but would also impact the police and offenders.
When you put that plus the pandemic together, you create all of this disruption. It makes it very, very difficult to manage crime at that point. So we saw some crimes go up, some certain violent crimes go up, like homicide went up all across the country. We saw domestic violence go up all across the country because people are at home. We saw some crimes actually go down. So burglary went down, a lot of property crime stuff went down.
Crime stats for Georgia's largest city mirrored Professor Topali's findings, with Atlanta experiencing an alarming spike in homicides and aggravated assaults.
We saw the uptick happening in real time last year, so we knew it had everything to do with COVID, and then on top of what we experienced last summer, I think has led not just Atlanta, but the entire country to where we are in dealing with this, what I described as a COVID crime wave.
Faced with an unprecedented public safety crisis, Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms convened an outside advisory council to review the city's response. Among the group's recommendations, that the city allocate around $70 million from its operating budget toward crime prevention.
Also, things that we were already doing, but really layering on the hiring of additional police officers, to making sure that we were expanding our camera network in the city, making sure that we were putting more lights throughout the city, that we were training our officers, that the police academy, the police and fire academy, an important part of that too, because we want to make sure that we have a facility that we can offer the best training for our officers.
The council's recommendations would also lead to the creation of the Mayor's Office of Violence Reduction.
We looked at best practices across the country, and in cities that were seeing true success in reducing crime, what were their best practices? And many of these cities have a dedicated office, not to just address crime when it happens, because that's what our police do. Our police are there to respond to incidents. But this Office of Violence Reduction really addresses those systemic issues that lead people to choose to commit crimes.
Atlanta Police Chief Rodney Bryant took the helm of the department during the height of the crisis in May of last year.
You got to remember, we were dealing with street racing at a very aggressive rate. Our homicide rate was significantly high. Our aggravated assaults were significantly high.
The crime wave alarming for residents citywide, but a surge in shootings, robberies, and other crimes in North Atlanta's upscale retail and business district this summer brought specific attention to the problem, showing that no section of the city is immune from violence.
I can tell you, Deidra, after being on the police department 30 years, one of the things that have been consistent is crime consistently moves from one location to the next. We will find ourselves having this conversation about another area of town next year this time. And it continues to do that. And right now we find it in Buckhead because this is where all the commercial and activities are right now.
The chief said an analysis revealed Buckhead had doubled in population and increased traffic congestion. His officers found themselves spending more time dealing with traffic problems, leaving them less time to patrol. The department immediately directed additional resources to the area, while looking at long-term solutions like establishing a mini precinct in Buckhead Village.
Now officers can address traffic issues in that space, and so more officers allow for the patrol officers to do more proactive policing.
While the department continues to see an increase in violent crimes compared to last year, the chief says those numbers have begun to come down due to initiatives put in place over the summer and fall.
I truly believe that us leaning on our partnerships with our Fed and our state partners and the level of enforcement that we have dedicated to the city of Atlanta, I'm confident that we'll continue to see those numbers come down.
While police and politicians wrestle with a complex issue, Professor Topali says statistics show Atlanta is the safest it's been in decades.
Although we have had a spike, and it's been going on for the last couple years, our numbers this year compared to 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, much, much lower than they were. 1999, 2000 Atlanta would love to trade places with 2021 Atlanta.
Coming up, who's behind the crime sweeping the country and how the problem has some in one Atlanta neighborhood calling for a split from the city of Atlanta. Buckhead is a community divided over the issue of crime. A vocal faction is pushing for de-annexation. Opponents say such a move would prove devastating for Atlanta, its city schools, and the new Buckhead City. Buckhead was in the news for all the wrong reasons this year.
What is the address of the emergency?
Shootings at Lenox Mall, Phipps Plaza, and other violent crimes in the city's affluent district, fueling the latest effort by a coalition of Buckhead residents and business leaders to split off from the city of Atlanta.
They don't care about Buckhead. They only care about our money. And that piggy bank is now over because we filed for divorce.
Bill White is chair and CEO of the Buckhead City Committee, the group behind the Buckhead Cityhood movement. He'll tell you crime is not the only issue driving the de-annexation effort, but it's a key concern. White says Buckhead, as its own city, would fund its own police department and could triple the number of police officers patrolling what is now Atlanta's Zone 2.
The only way we see making Buckhead strong and prosperous once more is to do what we're doing, because no one is listening at City Hall.
But at what cost? According to a fiscal analysis conducted by the Committee for a United Atlanta, a split would cost the city of Atlanta as much as $116 million annually in lost revenue.
In the recent past, we've had very big problems in Buckhead with crime, different kinds of crime. we've seen not only in Buckhead, but across the city and across the region and across the country.
Jim Durrett is president and CEO of the Buckhead Coalition and executive director of the Buckhead Community Improvement District. He is against the cityhood movement.
Criminals don't come to a sign in the road saying you're entering Buckhead City and say, I'm not going to go there. This is a target-rich environment. There are a lot of affluent people here, there's a lot of shopping, there's a lot of entertainment, and that is part of what attracts people to the area to live, but it also attracts people to the area who wish to commit crime. And that's going to continue regardless of whether we are Buckhead City or we are part of the city of Atlanta.
Durrett says the Buckhead Coalition is working with Atlanta PD and city leaders to come up with solutions, like the recent implementation of the Buckhead Security Plan, which combines law enforcement and crime deterrence to immediately address the area's pressing crime concerns.
In the year ahead, we are going to have another precinct in Buckhead that the Atlanta Police Department has committed to. I know that by next summer, there are going to be a minimum of 24 additional Atlanta Police Department officers that are going to be dedicated to this zone. So I see things turning around.
The group has raised over $1 million in a private-public partnership to have more officers on the streets, to install dozens of security cameras and license plate readers in the Buckhead area, while advocating for changes in policies to address the crime problem citywide. State Senator Brandon Beach has sponsored a Buckhead cityhood bill that, if passed, would allow Buckhead residents to vote on whether to become their own city. Not one state lawmaker who represents Buckhead supports de-annexation. If the legislation passes, Buckhead residents will vote next November on whether to form a new city.
We would be a city on that day if we won the ballot vote.
Coming up, the new face of crime, how gangs and juveniles are driving crime numbers. And Atlanta's next mayor shares his plan to fight crime during his first 100 days in office. They're younger, more organized, and no stranger to law enforcement. Police call them the new generation of criminal, but say many of them are still influenced by an old criminal element.
During the course of the execution of that search warrant, a firearm was found.
Clint Rucker began his legal career 30 years ago during a spike in violent crime, fueled by the influx of crack cocaine into the Atlanta community.
Crime spikes in Atlanta aren't anything unusual historically.
Decades later, the former senior prosecutor with the Fulton County DA's office, now a magistrate court judge and prominent criminal defense attorney, says today's criminals are younger and even more organized.
When you look at the system now, what we find is that the offenders who are most violent are even younger. And they tend to be related to some gang activity.
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp took the gang crisis head on in 2019 with the creation of the GBI Gang Task Force.
The GBI began what's the state's first law enforcement agency to enter the arena officially in the fight against gangs.
How significant is the gang problem in Georgia?
I'd classify it as very significant. When you look at the number of criminal street gang members and associates that are involved in criminal activity, I think the last number, official number I saw, was a minimum of 71,000.
Ken Howard, special agent in charge of the GBI Gang Task Force, says the groups are well organized, active in communities statewide.
You have individuals at the highest level who are living in gated communities, who are carrying on the appearance of legitimate tax-paying citizens, but who indeed are controlling a lot of this crime that goes on in the streets of Georgia, whether it's drug trafficking, human trafficking, fraud. Pandemic relief fraud has been a great source. It's been a multi-million-dollar illicit enterprise for our criminal street gangs that the depths of which we hadn't seen yet.
Many of those gang members and juvenile delinquents are no stranger to the legal system. APD Chief Rodney Bryant says those repeated run-ins with habitual offenders are especially frustrating for law enforcement.
One of the things we continue to see is repeat offenders and felons who've gotten out of jail who go back to doing what they do. This is sad for us to be able to go on a shooting where we have individuals either shot or the perpetrators of a shooting, and both are felons. That's problematic. When we're arresting people who we arrested days before, sometimes weeks before, seeing these people continue to victimize our community is problematic.
The problem's not just frustrating for police.
I think we do have the best system in the world in terms of dealing with people who are accused of criminal offenses. The system needs some work. It does need some work. It's overwhelmed. And by the system, I include everyone who's a participant in it. Everyone from the law enforcement officer that stops you on the street, all the way until you get to court and you have to deal with the judge and the prosecutor and the defense attorney.
When we come back, former Mayor Andrew Young looks back at the impact of crime on the city during his time in office. Former UN Ambassador Andrew Young is known worldwide for his humanitarian efforts and global influence. Decades after he ushered the city of Atlanta through a critical time as mayor, the elder statesman is now witnessing a new generation of political leaders tackle their own crime crisis.
Crime is a major issue in today's world, and it was a major issue when I was elected.
Surveying the city skyline, former UN Ambassador Andrew Young reflected on the crime problems he inherited when he was first elected Atlanta mayor in 1981.
I do solemnly swear and affirm, so help me God.
We were the murder capital of the world when I was elected, and we had to do a lot of analysis, and we had to rearm and re-educate the police.
Some of that work had already been initiated by his predecessor, Mayor Maynard Jackson.
Maynard had already started with police and community relations, and I brought Morris Redding in as a chief because he had been very influential in helping us to solve the missing and murdered children.
And the city partnered with the FBI and GBI to identify the criminal element.
We found that most of the people who were being killed then, in the 80s, were from Detroit, Chicago, and Miami. And they were found in the back of their cars with one bullet hole in the head. And it was an organized crime issue. That was different than what's going on now.
Different, yes, but Young's not worried.
And I'm not worried, not based on wishes, but based on the cranes I see.
4 decades after he first took office, those construction cranes represent to Young signs of promise for Atlanta's future, with the continued commitment of the business community and city leaders to get a handle on the latest crime problems.
That we have to make it pass. We have to help it pass.
Well, next year, Atlanta will have a new mayor. Voters chose Councilman Andre Dickens to lead the city. Now, just days before he was elected, I asked how he plans to handle the issue of crime.
Right off the bat, I'm putting the chief on a 100-day contract to bring down this violent crime wave and to also make sure we start our recruitment efforts for more officers, to retain the existing officers that we have, and to implement our community-based policing strategies. I already have it mapped out. These things will get going right away. I'm also going to surge to hire 250 officers to be able to make sure that they're trained in a 21st century way to resolve conflicts, but also de-escalate activities that could lead to violent crime. But we're going to get officers out of their cars to walking the beat, to going out to the grocery stores, the gas stations, and the shopping centers so they have a presence. And of course, you've heard about my 10,000 street lights. We want this city to be brighter so that deterrence of crime can exist, so that we also can have cameras to make sure criminals know that they're being watched.
Read more about Mayor-elect Dickens' public safety plan at fox5atlanta.com. While much is being done by lawmakers and law enforcement to combat crime, those we talked with agree there must be that same commitment by society as a whole to address underlying socioeconomic issues like unemployment, poverty, and lack of education. All things experts say are contributing factors to crime nationwide. Thank you for joining us for this Deidra Dukes special report.